Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue à l'Université Carleton. I would like to also thank the Algonquin people for being here on their territory. In the interests of Canadian understanding, on the west coast of Canada, we usually say unceded territory because there are very, very few treaties that have been signed, and I noted that you said ceded territory. So Canada is an ongoing, diverse, and interesting place. Mr. Dion is very sorry he couldn't be here. The Arctic is a passion for him. He found out yesterday afternoon at about 3 that he would be going to attend the funeral of Shimon Peres. But he called me and he said, "You make sure that everyone there knows that I wrote this speech, and I want you to give it the way in which I give it," which is really challenging because when you are supporting Minister Dion and he says things like, "Pamela, we are not to stop this." I don't know if that's yes or no, go or not. But in the spirit of our country, Prime Minister Trudeau invited Rana Ambrose and also Thomas Mulcair to come with him. So Rana is going, as well as former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, and of course Minister Dion. As we, just with reference to the people-to-people ties, which I think is so remarkable about the North. I did have the opportunity when I was Mayor of West Vancouver during the 2010 Games to figure out who we would partner with. Whistler and Vancouver were the big guys, and good morning, West Vancouver and Richmond were venue cities with major events, but not the host cities. So we thought, well, who else is perhaps smaller and overlooked? And we immediately thought, as a coastal community, that we would reach out to the north. So we partnered with Nunavut and Yukon, who were able to do that. And I went to Iqaluit and Penguitang, and I spent about 10 days there. And it's actually remarkably small in terms of people, and welcoming and warm. And so Elizabeth Chatiapik, the mayor of Iqaluit, was my host, but also at that time I met Eva Ariak, Leona Aglukar, Peter Taptuna, and I didn't meet Mary Simon, and I can't even believe I'm in the same room. It's really such an honor. And then during the games, Elizabeth said, well, the Iqaluit Council passed enough money for a flight, which is not insignificant, and that was it for her budget. So she spent the whole time with me in West Vancouver. We got on the bus every morning, and I'll never forget the first day of the Olympics at Northern House. It was one of the more popular venues. And I said, well, Elizabeth, we should start at the end, and you should shake every single hand. People really want to meet you. She said, no, don't be ridiculous. No one knows who I am. And I said, I'm not kidding you. People are here to meet you and understand the North. And she started doing that, and she couldn't believe the reception and how fascinated and genuinely interested people are. So that was my experience, and we've stayed in touch. So we're gathering here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Arctic Council. And I think, it's an important time to reflect on what the North means to Canadians. Of course, it covers 40% of our territory, which is very difficult, I think, to even comprehend, with over 100,000 people, more than half of whom are Indigenous, which is at the heart of our identity. Yes, we have a Northern soul, which is expressed in the True North Strong and Free. But few places on earth evoke more glorious images than the North. It's the land of the aurora, where the northern lights dance across the darkened sky at night, and the land of the midnight sun, and of polar days that go on forever, under light that never fades. Our northern belonging fills us with pride, and we owe that first and foremost to the people who live in the North. For thousands of years, Indigenous people thrived, survived. We owe them much. And the Prime Minister and our government are committed to showing that. This is what Canadians want. It's what the Prime Minister and President Obama said last March in Washington, D.C., in the U.S.-Canada Joint Statement on Climate, Energy, and Arctic Leadership. As Arctic nations, our shared future rests on the people who have made it their home. As we speak, our very dedicated Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, Dr. Carolyn Bennett, is consulting all over Canada. I've really never seen anything like her dedication to this. She's surrounded herself with some of the best, most competent Canadian experts who know the Arctic well, including the brightest scientists and those who bring traditional knowledge to the table. Among them is Minister Bennett's special representative, Mary Simon, a remarkable leader who helped create the Arctic Council 20 years ago, along with Minister Dion's predecessor and former colleague, Lloyd Axworthy. Minister Bennett has been very clear that socioeconomic development of northern inhabitants will be at the heart of her preoccupations. The resilience of these communities, the opportunities for their children, mentally, physically, culturally, are at the very center of Minister Bennett's personal mandate. It is all the more important to remember that the well-being of northern people is being challenged by great shifts, as we know, in the physical and economic environments of the North. The Arctic is attracting more and more economic activity. It will be the site of major new economic projects. Its resources are increasingly coveted, navigation routes are opening, and all the while the ecosystem remains as fragile as ever. The North is an essential part of our future and a place of extraordinary potential, and the world will count on Canada as a responsible steward of this great barometer of our planet. Northern resources, explored responsibly, and offer huge potential for increased economic development. But if we are irresponsible about the use of those resources, it will be a disaster, not only for us, but for all of humanity. How can we not be profoundly troubled by the negative effects of climate change that we already see? Temperature increases, greater precipitation, shorter, warmer winters, and decreases in ice, snow, and permafrost cover are among the likely changes to persist for centuries. It's hard to even believe that we could be witnessing this. These changes will affect northern inhabitants and the whole planet. Arctic vegetation zones are shifting, insect outbreaks and forest fires are increasing in frequency, severity, and duration. Reductions in sea ice are shrinking marine habitat, not just for polar bears, but for seals and seabirds, pushing some species towards extinction. Changing snow, ice, and permafrost conditions are jeopardizing community infrastructure and hunting, fishing, and herding activities, those very activities that have sustained people for generations. Melting of highly reflective Arctic snow and ice reveals darker land and ocean surfaces, increasing absorption of the sun's heat, further warming the planet, and as we know, that has an exponential effect. Increases of glacial melt and river runoff add more fresh water to the ocean, which raise global sea levels and possibly slow the ocean circulation that brings heat from the tropics to the poles, affecting global and regional climate and connecting us actually to Pacific Islands in the south, who are experiencing in the opposite direction the very same thing. We see these changes and are afraid of them, but we shouldn't ignore them, and we can't turn the clock back. So our choice must be to be responsible and respectful of development of the Arctic's natural resources in ways that bring positive outcomes to northern communities and that mitigate the negative impacts using the most reliable evidence available. Many of you here are those we will count on. Collaboration with and among governments at all levels, Indigenous communities, scientists, the private sector, and technical and policy experts will be critical. Our Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna, is at the heart of this fight for sustainable development, and she is wearing this personally. It is such a struggle. She and Minister Bennett cannot succeed alone. All ministers in our government are mindful of the ecosystems of the North. And we're doing this in a cooperative way. So let's talk about this organization, whose 20th anniversary we celebrate today, and salute the 8 countries that make up the Arctic: the Kingdom of Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, the United States, and Canada. It says nothing would be worse, but I'd like to switch that around and say nothing could be better than those 8 countries working together. The worst part is to avoid our collective responsibility. So today is a good day to double our resolve. The Arctic Council is the way to create cooperation among us. We can be proud as Canadians that the Arctic Council was largely the product of our diplomacy and leadership under Jean Chrétien, but I'd also like to salute Finland because that's the whole spirit of the Arctic Council. It's increasingly the spirit of our world. At the table, the Indigenous permanent participants from Canada, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the Gwich'in Council International and the Arctic Athabascan Council, as well as the Aleut International Association, the Sami Council, and the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North. Quite aspirational. In the words of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, words later borrowed by the current U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council, the aim is one Arctic, shared opportunities, challenges, and responsibilities. Canada and our 7 neighbors have a responsibility to protect the North, and the world is counting on us. Happily, we are joined by 12 other countries with observer status. In addition to the EU, Canada welcomes the contributions of observers to the work of the Arctic Council. The world is in better shape because the Arctic Council exists. And indeed, since the Ottawa Declaration was signed in the West Block of Parliament 20 years ago, we have done much to prove the Council's worth. For example, Indigenous peoples of these Arctic countries have been included at the table, so their concerns and perspectives are incorporated into the discussion, and Canada has championed this cause. Arctic challenges cannot be addressed without working with the people who live there. It is one of Council's defining features and gives it more domestic, regional, and international legitimacy and leads us all. We just need to catch up. 2 binding agreements among the 8 Arctic states have been negotiated, one on search and rescue in 2011 and the other on oil pollution preparedness and response signed in 2013. Work is continuing on a 3rd agreement related to Arctic scientific cooperation. Landmark studies have been published on environmental pollutants, shipping, tourism, safety, search and rescue, conservation of biodiversity, oil pollution response, human health, Indigenous languages, and of course, climate change. As the Minister of the Environment, well, this is Minister Dion really speaking, when he was Minister of the Environment in 2004, he was fortunate to represent Canada at the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in Iceland, when the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment was released, a groundbreaking assessment on the impacts of climate change in the Arctic. The framework for action on enhanced black carbon and methane emissions reductions was concluded, which lays out a common vision for Arctic states to accelerate the decline in overall black carbon emissions and to significantly reduce overall emissions of methane. And that was a significant agreement signed as well between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister at the meeting here in the summer. And finally, the newly created Arctic Economic Council promotes business, trade, and investment opportunities in the region. Much has been accomplished, and it should give us the momentum to redouble our efforts, and I know that Finland is going to get us off to a great start. The governments of Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, along with the Canadian permanent participants, have been our partners and key contributors to this success, and we look forward to our continued collaboration. I would also like to acknowledge the contributions of several federal government departments to our Arctic Council efforts. The Council will be essential for the economic development of the people of the North, for the responsible extraction of resources of the North, and for the preservation of this ecosystem that is essential to the health of the entire planet. Fortunately, the Government of Canada has engaged itself resolutely to science and evidence-based decision-making because the success of the Arctic Council depends on the scientific understanding we have of the North. Yesterday, Minister Kirsty Duncan, Minister of Science, was in Washington, D.C. to discuss Arctic science. We should also remember that we have another pole to worry about, of course, which I mentioned, which is in the Antarctic. Conditions are different, but they resemble us here in the North. Cooperation will be necessary at all levels. And to continue and to conclude on the importance of cooperation, we really have to insist that we need a relationship between Canada and Russia in the Arctic. Almost half of the North is Russian, 25% is Canadian. But between us, we control 3/4 of the North. And preventing scientists from these countries from talking to one another is irrational. Our government wishes to be rational. We wish to establish links with Russia cautiously because we believe that that serves the interests of Canadians, of Russians, others, like those in Ukraine and Syria. Our policy of engagement doesn't mean agreement, but we are working tirelessly to both hold Russia to account and to begin conversations. And when you consider this from the perspective of the Arctic, it's eminently sensible and it's essential. When Prime Minister talked to President Putin and when Minister Dion had his meetings with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, they both signaled our profound disagreement with some of Russia's policies in Ukraine and in Syria. But we also said, we want to talk with you. NATO's policy is one of deterrence and dialogue. And that message in the world today is so important. And at the core of this dialogue will be the North. Because responsible conviction means engaging even when we disagree. And Minister Dion, I think, is doing a very good job of that. And he is sometimes criticized when people take that phrase and that approach lightly, but he certainly does not. Cooperation with Russia on the full range of Arctic issues is simply in our best interests. And we're very pleased to know that a Canada-Russia Arctic Conference is planned for late November with Carleton University as the host. I'll do my best to get the minister here for all of you. Diplomacy and cooperation with all members of the Arctic Council is vital. The North is not a place for military confrontation or buildup. The Arctic Council is a forum for consensus. No consensus is possible without Canada and Russia working together, as difficult as that may be. Our government will build stronger relationships with all Arctic states, particularly as the next Arctic Council chair, Finland, looks to build the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goals into its chairmanship program. These goals are just as important for the circumpolar North, our own North, as they are anywhere else in the world. After 2 decades, Canada's vision for the Arctic Council has become a reality and a work in progress. It's strengthened our identity as an Arctic nation. It's strengthened our relationships with our Arctic neighbors. It's strengthened the profile of the Arctic domestically and internationally. Not everyone will be fortunate enough to visit the Arctic and see its beauty, its majesty with their own eyes, but to ignore the Arctic would be an unforgivable mistake. I deeply regret I was supposed to go on a trip with many of our ambassadors, but it was the week of the slight elbow situation. And so optional travel was canceled, and I was back in my seat where I was staying the whole time. I didn't get up. Canada is committed to the Arctic and its people, and under Justin Trudeau will play a leadership role on the international stage for sustainable development of the region. Let me finish with a quote from Sheila Watt-Cloutier, the great Northern leader, whose book I actually carry around with me. There's so much profound thoughts there, called The Right to be Cold. She says, if you want to know how healthy the world is, come to the Arctic and feel its pulse. Merci beaucoup.